Next up, however, we have the report from the seminar Knowing in the Anthropocene, which will be delivered by Renzo Taddei, who is an anthropologist working at the Federal University of Sao Paulo.
Thank you. Well, this was an extremely rich seminar in many different dimensions: conceptual, sensorial, methodological, in ways that make it impossible for me to make justice to it in the short time I have to make this presentation. I therefore beg my seminar colleagues to complement this presentation in the discussion time we should have afterwards, filling the gaps they may perceive in my report. The activities of the seminar combine a series of methods and strategies for engagement with the themes to be discussed, methods such as meditation practices, interactive games in which participants got to know each other and explore the physical and natural environments of the room in which the seminar took place and the garden immediately adjacent to it, a presentation about pollution in the Tibetan Plateau from the perspective of the atmospheric sciences, an analysis of the work of philosopher Alfred North Whitehead and its implications for the question of the technosphere, a discussion of artist Tomás Saraceno's Aerocene project, and we had the privilege and the honor of having his direct participation in the seminar, and group work followed by class debate. The program of the seminar announced that a, quote, growing number of human and non-human entities are being locked into the technosphere, which is itself locked into an accelerating exploitation of fossil fuels and other material resources, and depends on particular forms of knowledge production, unquote. The technosphere is here defined as an assemblage of technical, biotic, and abiotic entities that has emerged on a given planet and has acquired a degree of autopoietic autonomy from other planetary subsystems. The main goal of the seminar are then to address the questions: is a different kind of technosphere possible? What forms of knowledge might a different technosphere require and engender? A basic premise of the debate is the idea that the emergence of this sphere is based on a particular thermodynamic imaginary and is solidified by certain patterns of knowledge production which are neither permanent nor inflexible. Saraceno's Aerocene project was chosen by the conveners to function as the main stimulus for debate, and at the same time it was a platform for concept development and experimentation. The Aerocene project consists in the creation of sculptures in the form of balloons or spheres using simple materials such as plastic bags and tape, and that are capable of floating in the atmosphere with no chemical propellant. In November of 2015, in White Sand Dunes, New Mexico, with an Aerocene sculpture, Saraceno produced the first fully certified solar flight, lifting human passengers for over 3 hours and without any form of fuel other than sunlight. The flight of the Aerocene is based on the physical principle of buoyancy, defined as an upward force exerted by fluid that opposes the weight of an immersed object. As sun radiation hits the surface of the Aerocene, the density of the air inside of it decreases, its volume increases, and buoyancy pushes it upwards. It functions exactly as a hot air balloon, except for the absence of any source of energy other than sun radiation. Well, the fact that sun radiation alone can lift an adult person is already provoking enough. Yet, Saraceno has been exploiting the possibilities of his creation in a number of interesting, innovative ways, going from the use of balloons in citizen science projects of monitoring the atmosphere to conversations with scientists at MIT in order to explore the technological possibilities of the Aerocene. According to Saraceno, a balloon with a diameter of 1.6 kilometers is capable of lifting over 600 tons of weight, with a difference of temperature between inside and outside air of just 1 degree Celsius. Just having people breathing inside of it would make it fly. Heavy things can and do fly, says Saraceno. A cumulus cloud often weighs as much as 60 elephants. This fact led him, in the words of Sasha Engelman, to dream with cloud cities. According to Saraceno, the Aerocene holds a message of simplicity, creativity, and cooperation for a world of tumultuous geopolitical relations, reminding us of our symbiotic relationship with the Earth and all its species. In our seminar, we had the opportunity to unpack the supposed material simplicity of the Aerocene and reveal its incredibly rich and complex poetic and philosophical potential. 4 things were syntagmatic aligned, bringing to the surface, although not without some turbulence, the dimension of the problem that the conveners of the seminar nicely call thermodynamic imaginary. These 4 things were: 1, the creative reenactment of the Tapa Wanka Yap, or throwing the ball ritual of the Lakota Nation, as the very first activity of the seminar, led by Janot Mendler de Suarez. This is a ritual in which the relationship between the people and the universe is symbolically established through processes of giving and retribution. Number 2, the discussion of aerosols, pollution, the Tibetan plateau, and the deeply ingrained patterns of perception about the atmosphere, presented by Zoe Lucia Luthi. Zoe also led short meditation sessions during the seminar. 3, the presentation of Alfred North Whitehead's criticism of the concept of the bifurcation of nature, which produced a divorce between mind and matter in Western scientific thought, by Melanie Segal. And 4, the onto-aesthetic subversion introduced by the Aerocene, presented by Sasha Engelman and by Thomas Saraceno himself. Well, the use of the expression onto-aesthetical subversion is part of the conceptual gymnastics put in place in the collective attempt to construct the instruments for the constitution of new forms of embodiment and new habits of thought as 2 sides of the same existential coin, more attuned with the thermodynamic imaginative requirements for working with and in the Anthropocene, in the technosphere, in the context of the Anthropocene. Interestingly, one dimension of the thermodynamic imaginaries we are trying to surpass unexpectedly presented itself and frustrated what was perhaps the most exciting activity of the seminar: the launching of Aerocene sculptures in Tempelhofer Feld at the dawn of Monday, April 18, yesterday. Saraceno and his team had brought 2 balloons to the field. The meteorological conditions were just perfect: clear skies and absence of wind. After a bit more than 1 hour and a half of sunlight warming, the Aerocenes started to lift spectacularly above the ground. A few minutes later, here we have a picture of Bronislaw Serginski under one of the balloons. A few minutes later, 2 cars of the private security company that oversees the field appeared, asking for permits. That was the end of the launching. In the last activity of the seminar, the class was divided in 4 groups, each with the mission of envisaging strategies for bringing about the transformations in the thermodynamic imagination that we believe would be required for constituting a better future. Interestingly, 2 of the keywords of the seminar, embodiment and habits of thought, were in one way or another present in the proposals of all 4 groups. Group 1 proposed a walking experience in the garden adjacent to the classroom, followed by an analysis of people's perceptions of how the walking process took shape. The activity was inspired by Pauline Oliver's sonic meditation performances. And one of the conclusions reached by the group is that social interaction patterns necessarily occur in conjunction with the space. The space between individuals then reveals itself as something full and not as empty. Group 2 engaged in an activity in which the goal was the increasing of the awareness of one's surrounding through the direct engagement of our senses with the environment. Group members explored the tear garden. It seems that some members of the group ate flowers in natura. The group also explored the practice of geocache, the establishment of networks of impersonal exchange of goods and narratives. Group 3 proposed an exploration of novel forms of conceptualizing death in the context of the Anthropocene, against the background of the creation of relations of responsibility and reciprocity towards other forms of life. The group proposed thought experiments, such as the creation of a dataset of a dying world, visualization mechanisms that would enable each individual to see how many of and which living beings have to die for each one of us to remain alive, and the provocative and subversive exploration of mechanisms such as carbon offset markets, substituting carbon for life, a death offset market in which relations would never be perfectly commensurable, and participants would have to accommodate that. And Group 4 worked in the construction of strategies for integrating the Anthropocene into local forms of knowledge of the environment in Tanzania and India through the constitution of what Mickey Glantz termed useful and usable knowledge. The target audience in India in the imagined scheme would be children and university students. Sensibilities and perception would be worked out through a combination of scientific knowledge and local expressive genres such as dance and music, art projects, etc. In Tanzania, the Anthropocene device would be part of the training of youth mobilizers who connect international development organizations with local communities. The Anthropocene would also be a tool for discussing the heritage of colonialism in the history of science. And finally, as convener Bronislaw Szerzyński nicely put at the end of the activities of the seminar, the stream constituted by our discussions, games, and conceptual and material experimentations resulted in a delta where the engagement and the energy of the group was spread into a number of different directions, greatly enlarging the total potential fertility of the existential fields in which we are part, and in which the seeds deposited by this seminar will certainly flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, don't go away. All right, questions. We can already see that the Anthropocene is being policed, literally.
I prefer a different.
Yeah, I think that's an image we'll all want to keep in our minds. It's a wonderful one. Questions? Yes, Lizette.
That was a very beautiful presentation, very interesting presentation of works and descriptions. But I'm going to perhaps do something that will add a little bit of conflict to the situation. Through speaking to other people in the different modalities, I heard that there was a really contentious moment of opening in the knowing in the Anthropocene that had to do with the appropriation of indigenous knowledges that were used inside of some of the introduction exercises. And this was not mentioned in your report. So if there is anybody from the group that would be able to tell us what happened, I think it might be a very productive site of conversation.
I don't want to personally answer to that. There were many moments of conflict, and I tried to summarize it into the concept of turbulence. But if someone else in the seminar could.
Over there?
I'd be happy to, because I'm the one who's responsible for introducing an adaptation of a Lakota sacred ritual, symbolizing our generous and generative connection to the universe. In our opening, it was the way in which we chose to introduce each other to each other and to set the stage for this exploration of a mindset for the Anthropocene. I think one of the things that ran throughout that perhaps is not explicit in the summary is that an important aspect of exploring knowing is asking the question of what kinds of knowledge are required, but also what kinds of rules and habits have we actualized that we need to transgress, that we need to break in order to access more fully all of the kinds of knowing to which we as human beings may be required in this Anthropocene. So part of that is the establishment of a sacred space within, without, and the purpose, one of the purposes behind all of the interactive exercises was essentially to activate the sacred space within us and to try to activate it within the group. So what we did in the structure was to provide not just quiet personal meditative experiences, but also to embody a generative and generous relationship with each other. And that initial adaptation of an indigenous, deeply historic description of a worldview and a cosmos was an invocation of generations of knowledge that go back to the dawn of time, to which we must indeed connect and not denigrate. I was delighted with the framing of appropriation, and all are free to wrestle with that. It's one of the issues that we need to wrestle with. But the framing of appropriation
I'm sorry, I'm going to be
is also a
rude.
rule.
I've been given license to cut people off, and we just have a few more minutes for discussion here. And actually, since you spoke in the last round, I see a question all the way back there, and then over there. So, and then we can come back to you in front if.
The shutting down of the wild imagination seems to be hugely symbolic and representative of a problem that is interesting to try to deal with. So I'm curious if there was a follow-up discussion about when we have these sort of wild new approaches that seem scary and unfamiliar to the COP mechanisms in our society that are going to come and shut us down when we're looking for solutions. Was there a discussion about maybe, does that mean we need to disguise sometimes our approaches, or does it mean to keep persisting in the same ways how do we get around this sort of the COP mechanisms?
It looks like there's someone down here who can directly respond to that. And or there. Go ahead, Bron.
I mean, it was an uncomfortable opening to the seminar, and I wish we'd been more reflexive and had realised that there was a potential for this. Different perceptions of what was going on in that opening ceremony. But it was we did talk about it straight away, and I think it was very generative. That there was voices. We had a discussion for a while. It didn't become a common theme. I think maybe some people left the seminar because of it. I certainly tried to acknowledge that you can't erase the uneven history of power, geopolitical history of power, which means that one person speaking another person's language, using the language of person B, is not necessarily equal to person B using the from culture A, and so we did. I think in some ways the groups managed to pick up some of those kind of themes about how we how we, what the gentleman at the back was mentioning about how we find ways of talking about these things, which sometimes produce discomfort and sometimes ethically difficult.
Okay. All right, so I think we have time for one or two, at most, more comments. So I'm just going to go with the two of you down here. Yeah.
Sure. I just wanted to respond to the gentleman at the back, who I think you were referring to the troubling or the intervention in the moment of launching the Aerocene sculptures. And I think although the launch was troubled in this way, it was a really actually pregnant, robust moment for all of us, because as we know, the technosphere does not only include technical devices, computer screens and things like this, but also institutions, also discourses, also infrastructures of how one can use spaces like the air. And so we saw, kind of very ironically, trying to launch an aerostatic object on the surface of an old airport runway, that we were kind of like even though the weather of the site was perfect for the launch, the institutional weather was not was not compliant. And so I think it was, even though, it was troubling, it was a moment that kind of really enfolded and kind of performed a lot of what we're talking about here in terms of like technosphere infrastructure and how to work obliquely to those things.
Okay, I think we're going to need to stop there if we're going to keep to the Grandmaster schedule. So thank you very much.